Hi, everybody. It's starting to snow. You know what that means. Snowball fight incoming. Got ya. Welcome to Fiddlesticks and Stitches. I'm Fiddle. Today's project is the kitchen sink. Link to materials is in the description box below, and while you're there, don't forget to print your pattern. For this project, I used this bulk bag of wood. It had some nice square dowels, which we are going to use for this project because it's mostly framework. My pattern looks a little bit different from yours because I made the project first and then did the pattern after. To start this project, we're going to grab our wood dowels and cut all of our sticks to size. You should end up with 13 square dowels and one round dowel. Grab two 4-inch dowels and two 2-inch dowels and make a rectangle. Gluing as you go. You are going to make two of these. While those are drying, we're going to start on our plastic pieces. Before you start painting, use a piece of sandpaper and go over your plastic pieces really quick, so that way it gives something for the paint to stick to. We are only painting the underside or the bottom. This gives it the look of old porcelain. I'm not really sure what this piece of plastic came from, but I think something from like a Wafers cookie box or something like that would have a wavy plastic like this. Now we're going to turn our attention back to our rectangles and turn them into a box. The easiest way I found to do this was to start with the wood glue, and then when you get it set in place, add the super glue. You'll have one post at all four corners. The tricky part for me was making sure both rectangles lined up. Using the wood glue super glue combo made it so much easier. After everything's dry, it's a good idea to check and make sure that your plastic pieces fit. Do not trim yet. We have to make sure that we have the spacing for the wood piece that goes along the back. So for the time being, we're going to turn our attention to our popsicle sticks and sand down just the outside edges. Don't worry about cutting them to length yet because you want them to be just over the edge of the sink. Speaking of sink, that's where we're turning our attention next. For this part, your best bet is to go with a low ridge at the back of the sink to allow for that stick to lay there. The rigid plastic piece that I used had a nice curve right there at the edge, and I thought it led into the sink pretty nice, so I made sure to keep that piece on there. I did trim a curve right there where I'm putting the marker and cut about a ridge to a ridge and a half off so it met up with the edge of the sink. And be sure to measure in between each step so that way you don't cut too much off at a time. After making sure I had the top piece the way I wanted it, I took my pencil and marked out where I needed to cut it for the length. And just like the other side, trimmed it a little at a time until I had it to where I needed it. The glue I chose to use to hold down the plastic pieces and the wooden piece across the top is an E6000 type glue. It would bond to the plastic and to the wood. I used a few binder clips to hold it together while the glue dried. Okay, back to our popsicle sticks. We're going to lay them out on the sides one by one and measure them where we want them to end and cut them accordingly. I cut around 10 to 12 of these pieces in all. Now that we've got our pieces cut out, it's time to glue them down. I used good old wood glue for this. After some drying time, we're moving on to the front of the sink. The first thing you want to do is take your dowel and make sure that it fits in there tight. This is what we're going to use as our curtain rod. Now grab your fabric because we're going to start to make the curtain. I did cheat for mine. Instead of actually sewing the fabric, I used fabric glue. It works for quite a few things, although I will say that it will leave fabric a little shiny, which I found very useful in one of my other projects. My piece of fabric also had a hemmed edge, so that's what I'm going to be poking my skewer through, so I didn't even have to sew that. And it does stop fraying. It did take some coaxing to get the skewer through the curtain. I would say your best bet is to sand your end really good so that way there's no splinters that can catch. At one end of the rod, I did glue the curtain to it so that way it can only be pulled from one side. This also helped with holding it down. This fabric was a little too thick to be used for this. Next time I'll probably just use like a t-shirt, but I did like the pattern that was on it. To glue the curtain rod in, I used super glue and then wood glue over top of that because I needed it to stay fast right away, so that way I could do what else I needed to do with it to make sure it was in place. After some drying time, I went ahead and glued the curtain that I glued to the wooden dowel. I also glued to the side of the cupboard so that way it can't be pulled open. The next piece to glue on is the faceplate, and I used my wood glue. I did add a towel rack and towel, and I will add photos of that at the end. I gave it one final sand, and then it was time to put on the faucet and spigot. To do that, we're going to cut a square hole in the wooden dowel that we have at the back of our sink. I did this with my knife and just kind of plucked it out of there with the end of it. I did not go all the way through, I stopped at the plastic. For the spout itself, I used a copper staple and bent it in a candy cane shape. Sanded the end that was going to be going into the wood and glued it in with super glue, dab of E6000, and the patience to sit there and hold it. You may want to use a pair of tweezers for this part. The final piece is our earring, which is our faucet knob. I did this by taking my pokey tool and poking a hole where I wanted it and using the super glue E6000 combination to hold it in place. I really hope you enjoyed this simple little kitchen sink. Please don't forget to share, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.